Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, I really want to thank all of you for your participation in this important workshop. We're here today to discuss the pervasive threat to people, communities, and institutions worldwide that identify as or are identified by others as Jewish, whether ethnic or religious. No one should experience hate, discrimination, or violence simply because of who they are. Before we begin the substance of today's program, I want to go over just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. We want this to be a robust and honest conversation. There will be a Q&A following the prepared remarks by our panelists and a break, don't worry, to facilitate each of you feeling comfortable to ask whatever questions you might have. There is no press today. And we will ask that everyone please refrain from taking photographs or videos of any kind. We have an official photographer and videographer with us who will video only the prepared remarks by the panelists and take photos of the panel itself. There will be no photos at all during the Q&A. This event is governed by Chatham House rules, so we ask that what is said in the room is not attributed to anyone, with the exception of the panelists and invited speakers. Having said that, the purpose of today is to educate the broader diplomatic community in Geneva on the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism globally and its life-altering effects on individuals, communities, and the wider society. We wish to foster greater understanding and collaboration among international stakeholders. So to that end, we hope you will share what you have learned today with your missions and among your colleagues. And all of your PRs have been invited to a follow-up reception this evening with the panelists. It is our hope that they will engage at that time in a less structured but equally important conversation. We are here to talk about anti-Semitism, but we can only do so within the broader context of discrimination because all forms of hate are interconnected. I often say this, but it bears repeating. Hate begets hate, and we must counter it in all its forms. No community is safe unless we are all safe, and no one's rights are fully protected unless all of our rights are protected. I think of hatred like a giant submarine submerged under the water. And throughout history, anti-Semitism has served as its periscope. It is sent up to the surface, and if the waters are smooth and the skies are clear, if anti-Semitism is acceptable, the whole submarine of hate emerges. Racism, xenophobia, religious intolerance, gender discrimination, ageism, ableism, homophobia, they are all interconnected. For me, it's also deeply personal. I know just how important it is that we combat anti-Semitism, hate, and discrimination of all forms. I know exactly where they can lead as the daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My family experienced firsthand the devastating consequences of anti-Semitism. This has deeply influenced my commitment to human rights and the fight against all forms of hate, discrimination, and atrocities. In my own life, I've been spat on, called a stupid, ignorant kike to my face, and thrown out of stores. This has happened in several countries. I have also had despicable and threatening things said to me and about me online. I faced unwarranted wrath simply for my identity as a Jew. Anti-Semitism has persisted throughout history and is once again dramatically on the rise, challenging our most sacred human rights principles and values. Geneva, as host to the Human Rights Council and a multitude of international organizations and civil society groups, is exactly the right place to fortify our resolve to position anti-Semitism prominently within our human rights agenda. You will hear today about the importance of speaking up when you encounter acts of hatred, discrimination, or violence against Jewish people or entities. Like many forms of targeted hate and discrimination, anti-Semitism also affects women differently than it affects men. For example, in the wake of October 7th, organizations that are typically the first to speak out on acts of sexual and gender-based violence were silent when it came to the experiences of Jewish women at the hands of Hamas terrorists. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to read the article in The Guardian that Deborah Lipstadt and I wrote together on the anti-Semitism behind the lack of response and the denial that took place. By not reacting to the experiences and testimonies of Jewish women, the use of or threat of rape as a tool of intimidation was normalized. This gave tacit permission that has led to a well-documented, drastic rise in threats of rape against Jewish women around the globe, and at least one act of gang rape of a 12-year-old girl precisely because she is Jewish. The threats themselves occur both online and offline. They are doubly problematic because they most often end up being categorized solely as threats of sexual and gender-based violence and not counted in reporting of acts of anti-Semitism. Thankfully, as awareness of this issue has risen, the important reporting and categorizing are getting better. Today's event is part of a larger effort throughout the UN system to elevate awareness and counter anti-Semitism. We have seen side events in Geneva and New York, multiple joint statements, and a high-level discussion held at UNESCO on educational policies. And France will host an important initiative at UNGA later this month on countering Holocaust denial and distortion through education and combating anti-Semitism and hate speech. Our collective mission goes beyond mere acknowledgement. It is a call to action. It's about education, fostering critical thinking, and providing concrete tools to counter anti-Semitic acts that feed the roots of extremism, racism, and societal division. You will hear about and have in front of you for reference the Global Guidelines for Countering Anti-Semitism launched earlier this year in Buenos Aires. The Biden-Harris administration, I think I'm missing something, I'm sorry. I am. I think it got cut out, but I will wing it. The Biden-Harris administration launched for the first time ever a plan for countering anti-Semitism within the U.S. government. Deborah was a big part of that. I was a big part of that. It has been a very important thing for the United States that we have a set of guidelines for across our government. And then the Biden-Harris administration announced the development of the first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia and related forms of bias and discrimination. In his statements, President Biden has consistently recognized the violence and hate that religious and ethnic minorities worldwide too often face. He has dedicated his administration to help build a world where people of all faiths and all backgrounds are free to live without fear of persecution. We anticipate that today's workshop will get us one step closer to that vision and hope that you have come with an openness to learning and willingness to share your questions and comments freely. This is a collaborative learning opportunity for every one of us. We have the privilege of having 5 senior officials at the forefront of combating anti-Semitism here to speak with us today. We are honored by the presence of the High Representative for United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, Miguel Moritanos, and a pre-recorded video message from High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. We have with us a powerhouse panel that includes my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt. We like to say, in the words of our mutual former Congressman John Lewis, that we often get into good trouble together. Before kicking off the panel, who will be properly introduced by our moderator, I would like to welcome my friend and colleague, President of the Human Rights Council and Moroccan Permanent Representative to the UN and other international organizations in Geneva, Ambassador Omar Zniber, to share his reflections and opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Michelle. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I am really pleased in my capacity as President of the Human Rights Council, and also indeed very interested to take part in this timely and important workshop on working together to counter anti-Semitism, a global human rights challenges. On anti-Semitism, we stand at a crucial crossroads. In the last year alone, the world has witnessed a 30% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, with thousands of attacks reported across multiple continents. This rise in anti-Semitism is closely tied to broader waves of hatred, discrimination, and xenophobia, which strongly and in many ways impact religious freedom in all its forms, as well as freedom of opinion both of which are crucial for the diversity in our societies. We cannot ignore the fact that anti-Semitic undercurrent remains alive in today's world, among and in various dangerous backgrounds. These backgrounds do not merely disdain Jews, they despise all who do not fit in their narrow vision of society and target Jews. They thrive on division. On their rise poses a direct threat to the principle of equality and human dignity that we all hold here. In confronting anti-Semitism, we are not only defending the rights of one group, but are safeguarding the very fabric of our diverse societies. But we must recognize that the issue of anti-Semitism has not been tackled in a specific manner by the Human Rights Council. Instead, it has been part of its work through discussions on religious hatred or racism more generally. For example, in 2019, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Ahmed Shahid, presented a report to the Council on, I quote, combating anti-Semitism and other forms of racism and hate, unquote, and presented his follow-up action plan to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. The Special Rapporteur stressed that anti-Semitism, if left unchecked by government, poses risk not only to Jews, but also to members of other minority communities, and urged states to adopt a human rights-based approach in combating anti-Semitism. We should go more this way and act on this malefic behavior with unity and determination. As we stand firm against anti-Semitism, it is crucial to underscore that our commitment is universal and impartial. We reject any attempt to exploit the fight, legitimate fight, of course, against anti-Semitism to unjustly target or marginalize other communities. We must remain vigilant against all forms of exploitations that seek to turn our fight against hate into a tool of oppression. Education stands as our first line of defense against this tide of hate. We must ensure that our schools, universities, and public forums are places where the lessons of history, and especially those concerning anti-Semitism, are taught with clarity and where the value of diversity is celebrated. It is through education that we can cultivate a new generation of leaders who are equipped to build bridges, not walls. Religious leaders, too, have a critical role to play as voices of wisdom and influence within our societies. I'm speaking here about wise religious leaders. Their guidance, rooted in the principles of peace, compassion, and justice, can help steer communities and religions towards understanding and mutual respect. By promoting interfaith dialogue and emphasizing our shared values, religious leaders can counteract the narratives, the wise one again, the narratives of division that extremists seek to propagate. I would like here just to refer to the role Kingdom of Morocco is playing in that sense, with the testimony, of course, of Mr. Muratinos, who organized recently the World Forum of the Alliance of Civilization in Fez in Morocco, this city where Muslims, Jews, Moroccan Muslim Jews lived there for more than 1,000 years in a perfect harmony. And still, the media, with its unparalleled reach and influence, also bears a significant responsibility. In an age where information can spread across the globe in seconds, the media must ensure that it never becomes a tool for spreading hatred and division, and if so, be countered by justice and denounced clearly by the public opinion. The false protocol of the elders of Zion stands as a powerful of the dangerous consequences such publications can have. Justice must also be swift and unequivocal. Our legal systems need to be equipped to deal with the hate crimes effectively, ensuring that those who commit these acts are held accountable. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as President of the Human Rights Council, I strive to maintain and recreate spaces for dialogue between penholders and political groups of the Council around problematic resolutions. Let us remember that the fight against anti-Semitism is not just a battle for the Jewish people. It is about defending the principle of human dignity, equality, and justice that are enshrined in international law and that bind us together as a global community. By standing together, particularly the Human Rights Council, which has absolutely a fundamental role to play in it, by standing together, by speaking out against hate, and by working tirelessly to promote tolerance, we can ensure that the dark lessons of the past do not dictate the future and never come back. I thank you.
Distinguished delegates, colleagues, anti-Semitism is a scourge on our collective humanity. It has left deep scars that are hard to heal, but we can and must learn from them. Both the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights have been nourished by this imperative, to learn how to overcome the hatred and ignorance that drive violence, destruction, and dehumanization. And yet, today, anti-Semitism still plagues our world with damaging consequences for individuals and communities. From the Americas, the Asia-Pacific, Middle East to Europe and Africa, reports of attacks and hate speech have multiplied. Already last November, I deplored the sharp rise in cases of anti-Semitism and also Islamophobia and vicious hate speech since 7 October 2023. People have been attacked, lives have been threatened, homes and religious buildings have been defaced with messages meant to frighten and provoke hate. Inflammatory and toxic rhetoric has been used by irresponsible political leaders, and the flood of hateful language, including on social media, is never ending and abhorrent. This is unacceptable, and we must tackle it together in all its forms. At the Human Rights Council's recent panel discussion on promoting human rights through sport and the Olympic ideal, I called for zero tolerance of anti-Semitism in sport. And during the recent UEFA European Football Championship, the World Jewish Congress and my office hosted a panel discussion in Berlin on combating anti-Semitism in football. But everyone has a role to play here, because Holocaust studies have highlighted how anti-Semitism is very often the canary in the coal mine. It is imperative that states and other actors take steps to address it, as well as all forms of hate speech that weaponize our diversity of origins and beliefs. International human rights law is a blueprint for effective action. It requires prohibiting any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. To address the root causes, we must deliver the full protection of the law to all individuals and communities. Let me again encourage states to develop comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation based on the practical guide that my office has published. Political and religious leaders need to speak out firmly and promptly against all incitement to violence and hatred. Digital platforms must enforce content moderation policies in accordance with international human rights standards. They must have a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism, and they must listen to those who are most affected by online hate speech. Furthermore, I strongly recommend effective initiatives to strengthen social cohesion, compassion, and solidarity. Colleagues, anti-Semitism is not just an affront to Jewish communities, it is an assault on our collective humanity, breeding division, discrimination, and violence. We all have a duty to eliminate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's my great honor to be here today and to moderate this distinguished panel of dedicated and knowledgeable individuals who work tirelessly to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. I would like to thank the U.S. mission for bringing us together, in particular Ambassador Taylor for her leadership and vision, as well as her staff for organizing today's panel. Before I introduce the main speakers and give them the floor, allow me to make some reflections on the impact of anti-Semitism from the perspective of the Jewish community around the world. The World Jewish Congress, representing the plurality of the Jewish people, sounds the alarm today about the unprecedented surge, mainstreaming, and normalization of anti-Semitism and hatred around the world. Anti-Semitism is an issue that Jewish individuals and communities have to live with for centuries. It took different forms of exclusion, discrimination, segregation, and even violence and death, reaching its pinnacle with the Holocaust, the systematic and industrial murder of 6 million Jews in Europe and North Africa. Many thought that after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism would go away. Regrettably, it has often raised its ugly head since, and Jews worldwide have to live with it. Our schools, synagogues, community centers have to be guarded. We often have to hide our identities or not wear any visible symbols for our own protection. Since October 7, we have seen a rapid deterioration of the situation. Our members and communities across the globe have been physically and verbally attacked, harassed, isolated, and marginalized. Jewish homes and institutions have been vandalized. Jewish students are excluded on campuses. Anti-Semitic discourse online has reached record levels. We are sounding the alarm because many seek to justify the horrific events of October 7. They wish to legitimize terrorism and find excuses for the genocidal ideology of Hamas. This has created a threatening environment for Jewish individuals who do not feel safe anymore in their homes or synagogues. Their ability to exercise their freedom of religion and their way of life is severely curtailed. These developments are not just a concern for citizens of Jewish faith or origin, but for all people of conscience. They pose a severe threat to national security, democracy, and the rule of law, and human rights for all. As Albert Einstein put it in 1930, quote, "The position of our scattered Jewish community is a moral barometer for the political world. For what surer index of political morality and respect for justice can there be than the attitude of the nations towards a defenseless minority, whose peculiarity lies in the preservation of an ancient cultural tradition," end quote. And I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that today's event will be an important milestone in the fight against anti-Semitism, where you, the delegates at the UN Human Rights Council, will join this common and urgent fight.
Good morning, everybody, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, my dear friends. Let me, at the outset, to warmly thank Ambassador Michelle Taylor, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, and the World Jewish Congress for organizing this timely event. I'm very pleased and very honored to be part of it. I have to say that 2 years ago, when I met first Ambassador Taylor, I was just being appointed focal point of the UN for combating anti-Semitism. We have this idea to come to the Geneva. We are in New York, far away. Well, in New York, we know. But we were, always trying to expand this debate, this awareness of how, unfortunately, anti-Semitism was spreading. So thank you, Ambassador, for organizing this panel, very important panel, with a great audience, great participants, and I think we will come with a most collective, engagement to fight anti-Semitism. My dear friend, the rise in anti-Semitism and Jewish hatred is alarming. This toxic hate is crossing geographical boundaries. It is not confined to one country or one continent, unfortunately. Therefore, I reiterate my firm belief that anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism has been and will always be a global problem. This past July, I had the privilege to participate in the moving ceremony commemorating the 30th anniversary of the AMIA terrorist attack in Buenos Aires. I was humbled by the testimony of AMIA survivors and the families of the innocent victims. Their bravery and endurance are inspiring. The ceremony, you remember, Deborah, was a painful reminder that anti-Semitism still thrives in many societies around the world. We should never let our guard down. Being alert means learning lessons from the past. In Buenos Aires also, at the initiative of Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, many countries adopted a new guideline to combat anti-Semitism. And I think today is a good moment to share your views. So, my dear friends, we should not be indifferent to the suffering of others, to refuse to allow impunity, to override justice. We all have a responsibility to address and combat anti-Semitism. And when I say we, because I believe that zero approaches will fall short. We should intensify our prevention efforts to denounce discrimination and to resolve conflict before they engulf everything and everyone. Speaking out and condemning anti-Semitism unequivocally is imperative. And what is true for anti-Semitism is true for other forms of hate. Racism, anti-Muslim bigotry, Islamophobia, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny. I, like other senior UN officials, have done so on several instances. Over the past 2 decades, the United Nations system has been, with member state encouragement and support, engaged in many actions to respond to anti-Semitic narrative, condemn anti-Semitic incidents, and promote educational and awareness-raising efforts to counter anti-Semitism and address other forms of identity-based hatred and religious intolerance. We only know too well that the dehumanization of the other diminishes societies. And discrimination and bigotry on the account of a person's religion, belief, race, ethnicity is a violation of human rights and international law. It's a despicable act that breaches everything that the United Nations stands for. Upholding human rights and protection of all individual dignity are the connecting threads that run through every area of UN's work. They cut through silos and across every sector, mirroring the full spectrum of national governance, clarifying priorities and helping to advance social and economic stability, inclusion, trust, and justice is also the most transversal prevention tool that we have. It is in this context that we should pause today to analyze what worked and what didn't work. Distinguished participants, I would like to reiterate the clear position of the United Nations regarding anti-Semitism. And I will say bluntly, loudly, United Nations is not anti-Semitic. Senior officials, including myself, have stressed publicly in numerous occasions that the denial of the right to exist from the State of Israel was a form of anti-Semitism. This position has been and continues to be maintained. We can have disagreements sometimes with the policies or the action of the government of Israel, but that can never be confused with a clear belief of the right of the people of Israel to live in peace and security are necessary. So now moving to the practical step in addressing anti-Semitism. 2024 has been marked in my work by two very moving trips. In January 2024, I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, representing, I might say, that I have learned a lot in the past month, talking to many of you who are present in this room. and elsewhere, especially Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt and Katharina Schnurbein, Ambassador Michelle Taylor, and other distinguished envoys participating in the workshop. Therefore, my office had been working on a UN plan for action to monitor anti-Semitism and enhance a system-wide response in coordination and consultation with UN relevant entities, including the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Department of Global Communication, and the Office of the Special Advisor for Genocide Prevention, as well as with other important stakeholders, such as Ambassador Lipstadt's office, the EC Special Coordinator, and other envoys and coordinators to combat anti-Semitism. In addition, of course, to a core group of the major Jewish organizations with whom I meet regularly. We are currently redrafting the plan, considering the grave developing situation since October 7. The appropriate time to launch of the plan will be coordinated with all these stakeholders. So, my dear delegates, I understand the urgency of taking action. The normalization of Jewish hatred is bone-chilling. The weaponization of religion by political leaders disturbing. Our world today needs the return of reason and rejection of the lies and the loathing that propelled the Nazis to commit their atrocious crime. I truly believe that the people are not born to hate. They learn to hate, and hate can be unlearned. I remain committed to continue to speak out and stand up against the pernicious forces of discrimination, racism, and hate, and to working with you all to enhance global effort to address anti-Semitism. Let's continue to work together, regardless of whether we agree on everything or disagree, because all we share one valuable asset, our common humanity. Thank you very much.
And I want to give the floor to Ambassador, and let me add Professor Deborah Lipstadt, the U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism, for her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you to the distinguished participants, to Ambassador Taylor and her team for making this possible, and thank you all for being present here today. Your presence here shows the urgency with which we must address this problem as a human rights problem. Let me say that quite explicitly. Anti-Semitism is a human rights problem. It's something that should not need to be said any place, but certainly not in Geneva, in this building, in this context, but it too often has not been seen as such. As some of the previous speakers have acknowledged, anti-Semitism is a prejudice like other prejudices. If a Jew does something wrong, people can say, oh, that's how Jews are. If a Jew does something right, oh, that's one of the good ones. And you can apply that to racism, to many other prejudices. Yet it has distinctive elements. In most cases, prejudice, certainly if we compare it to racism, such a prevalent problem in my country and in other countries, generally it entails punching down. The person, in this case, let's say the person of color, if we're talking about racism, is okay as long as they know their place. And their place is beneath me. In this case, it would be the dominant culture, the white culture. As long as they know what they should do and what their place is in society. I've lived the past 30 years in Atlanta, home of the Deep South, sometimes called the city surrounded on four sides by Georgia, a little bit different from many other parts, or the further north you go out of Atlanta, the more in the south you are. But in there, racism, not just in the South in the United States, the black person had to know their place, which was beneath. And that is true punching down. The same thing as anti-Semitism. The Jew had to know their place. The discrimination, and we saw it during COVID, contempt for Jews, contempt for particularly certain parts of the Jewish community. But there's an added element which is distinctive for anti-Semitism, and that is the punching up. The idea of the Jew, the mythic conspiracy myth of the Jew as the all-powerful group wanting to and able to, through their not smarts, but their cleverness, their conniving, their crafty abilities to wrought danger and harm to the rest of the world, even no matter whose expense it comes to, as long as it helps them. So there is already a distinction, the punching up, down, yes, but also the punching up. And if somebody is more you see someone is more powerful than you, more able to inflict damage, then you must stop them by any means necessary. There's another distinctive element of anti-Semitism, and that its mutability. Historians often talk about it as a virus, something in the past years we have become very familiar with. Its ability to change, its ability to adapt. It is the oldest, longest, continuous hatred in the world. It can come from Christians, it can come from Muslims, it can come from atheists, it can come from Jews, it can come from all sides of the political spectrum. If you trace in history, you saw it in Christianity, pre-Christianity, you saw it in Christianity, you saw it in Islam, you saw it in Protestantism, you saw it in socialism, you saw it in communism, you see it in the science of eugenics, Nazism. It moves, it adapts. In my congressional hearings before the United States Senate, when I was up for confirmation, I was asked by one senator about this. Did I see it as coming more from the right or from the left? And I pointed out two things. First of all, I said that I have friends on the political right who see anti-Semitism on the political left. And they are correct in what they see. They do not exaggerate. And I have friends on the political left who see it on the right, and they too are correct. The problem is they do not see it right next to them. And if you only see it on the other side of the political transom from which you stand, then I have to ask, are you interested in fighting anti-Semitism, or are you interested in fighting weaponizing anti-Semitism and using it to fight others? And I think there's another point here of anti-Semitism, which makes it distinctive. Anti-Semitism, as my office has, and our government has begun to speak about, as a multi-layered, multi-tiered threat. First and foremost, of course, to Jews, Jewish community. As Ambassador Taylor said, so anyone who associates with the Jewish community in Argentina. When we were there, we were reminded of the fact that many of the victims of the AMIA bombing were not Jews. They were non-Jews who were in the building, people walking by on the street. So it certainly is that. And if it were only that, it would be a worthwhile and important and valid thing for governments, for the Human Rights Council to address. A vulnerable society is under threat, it must be addressed. But it is more than that. It is a threat to democracy. Because any person who buys into the conspiracy myth, and I do not say theory, I say myth. Theories can be proven, myths stand as myths. The conspiracy myth, which is the cornerstone of anti-Semitism, that the Jews control the government, the media, the banks, whatever it might be, has given up on democracy. And the flip side of that is that those against whom this hatred is directed, Jews, begin to wonder, can or will the government protect me? Will the authorities protect me? In my own country, we saw this on our elite college campuses, where Jewish students wondered, would the authorities come and protect them? Would they take it seriously? We've seen it in some of the leading democracies. In the United Kingdom, Jews who came to watch a pro-Gaza march were told by the police to absent themselves because we can't protect you. Your presence here is a provocation. It should be protection at all costs. So that is it. But the third level is as a threat to international stability, international coherence. It is something that can be used to stir up the pot. My Yiddish-speaking forebears, not my Germans, but my Yiddish-speaking forebears would have called it a kochlöffel, a cooking spoon, used to stir up the pot because of the oldness of its hatred. You spoke of it as the canary in the coal mine. I talk about it as the flashing amber light that we see in traffic before the light turns red. It is warning us. And by the way, when that light turns red, it may be more anti-Semitism, or it may be other kinds of instability. But anti-Semitism as the harbinger of instability. What then can we do? I have been so pleased and gratified, pleased is really the wrong word when you're crafting guidelines to counter this lethal hatred, by the work that I've done with Katerina, with Miguel, with Felix, and so many other countries represented here. Over 42 countries have adopted, and international organizations have adopted this, and they are simple. You will read them, you will see nothing new. First and foremost, leaders must speak out. And that's leaders here in Geneva, that's leaders in particular countries, that's leaders of educational institutions, football teams, et cetera, et cetera. And you will see others, and we can discuss them in depth. The other thing, of course, that has become so confusing for many people is, or people have used, maybe not only confusing, but consciously used criticism of Israel as a foil for anti-Semitism. Let me say something quite specifically, and I hear it from my Israeli friends and leaders and Israeli government leaders. Criticism of the state of Israel does not constitute anti-Semitism. If that were the case, then the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who've been out on the streets would be anti-Semites, and of course they are not. But often, too often, certainly since October 7th, as Ambassador Taylor and I discussed in our article in The Guardian on the terrible, terrible gender-based violence against not just Jewish women. There were many different women who were assaulted during that time, Muslim women, Bedouins, non-Jews who had come for the rave, etc. But the silence of the world to that horrible thing. Silence from groups that in other cases, whether the horrific Boko Haram or the horrific genocide against the Yazidis women, groups that spoke out without hesitation were silent here. The only way to explain that is anti-Semitism. You will see in the global guidelines reference to the much debated and often maligned IRA definition. The IRA definition is a working, non-binding, non-legally binding definition that has proved to be exceptionally helpful in fighting anti-Semitism. What I am struck by, and we are anxious to get your questions, and some of the other panelists will discuss this in greater depth, but often there is more fight about this definition than there is an energy put in the fight against anti-Semitism. If you spend your energy fighting about the definition, then I have to wonder if you really, again, care about anti-Semitism. Or as came at one point from some of the terrorist organization Hamas, where they advised their compatriots in other parts of the world not to engage in anti-Semitism because it was not good for their cause. If you're against anti-Semitism because it's not good for your cause, you're not against anti-Semitism. In fact, you may even be for it. Finally, what can we do? In America, we have, if any of you have arrived, and I'm sure you have, given your work and your status in American airports, you are familiar with our friendly TSA folks. They're the Transportation Security Authority. Their motto is, if you see something, say something. And so it is with anti-Semitism. If you see something, if you hear something, say something. No genocide, whether we're talking about Armenian genocide, whether we're talking about the Holocaust, whether we're talking about Rwanda, or many others, too many others to even enumerate, ever began with guns or machetes or gas chambers. It begins with words. And the words we have heard too often about anti-Semitism, people seem willing to let it be. Often because Jews don't present as many of the other victims of racism and other forms of intolerance and prejudice, too many to mention. What are they complaining about? Why are they talking about the Holocaust again? What do they have to worry? Well, why do we talk about the Holocaust? Because 80 years ago, 1 out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth was murdered. Not died, not killed, murdered, assassinated, as we saw with the 6 people just assassinated a few days ago in the tunnels of Gaza. We speak about it because we know it is a lethal threat. Because we know it is a lethal threat, as I said earlier, to democracy and to stability. If you care about the stability of the world, you care about this issue. It begins with words. The Human Rights Council has too often tolerated words, allowed the singling out of the one Jewish state in disproportion, total disproportion to any other state in its condemnation. And one has to ask if there is this, not to say that Israel or any other country, my own included, is free from criticism. Absolutely not. But when you are only criticizing one, and it is one Jewish state in the world, you have to ask why. If there is this tolerance of anti-Semitism when there is not this tolerance of other forms of hatred, you have to ask why. It begins with words, and I hope the words we will share here today will help alleviate this terrible scourge that we see in the world. Thank you very much.
Since the attack by Hamas on Israel on 7th of October and the war that ensued in Gaza, we have seen an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitic incidents in Europe and the world. The Hamas attacks were the most lethal and brutal attacks on Jews since the Holocaust in one day, and have led to levels of anti-Semitism in Europe not witnessed since the Holocaust. We have seen scenes of hatred we hope never to see again, Stars of David spray-painted on homes where Jews live, arson attacks on Jewish communities and synagogues, attacks on Jewish students on campus. In the Europe of 2024, and even before, Jews are hiding their identity. They move their Stars of David inside the sweater and put a baseball cap on top of their yarmulke. Some have moved their mezuzahs inside the house. A Dutch Jewish newspaper changed their transparent envelope to plain white ones in order not to endanger the recipients. On a personal note, at the occasion of this year's International Holocaust Remembrance Day in January, I interviewed a survivor and a hidden child in Belgium, Baroness Regine Schlusny, and she said one heartbreaking thing: I don't want to be in hiding anymore. Authorities and NGOs have registered the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents since the Shoah. In France, for example, anti-Semitic incidents increased 4 times from over 400 acts in 2022, which is obviously already more than 1 per day, to over 1,600 in 2023. In Austria, until 6th of October 2023, the average number of reports per day had even fallen from 1.95 in 2022 per day to then 1.55 before 7th of October. And after 7th of October, there was a 5-fold increase in anti-Semitic incidents per day, so up to over 8 incidents per day. In Denmark, 121 incidents were registered in total in 2021. That figure increased in 2023 to over 1,200, by over 1,200%. In Germany, a third of hate incidents registered by the Federal Criminal Police Office of anti-Semitic nature affect a community, so 30% affect a community that represents only 0.25% of the population. This is the disproportionality that we're facing. And while reporting has improved, and that is also due to the fact that we are looking at a Europe-wide methodology in recording anti-Semitic incidents, because you have to make anti-Semitism visible. We know that the recorded incidents are only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, only 28%, according to our figures, are recorded. Since 7th of October, we have also seen anti-Semitism online exploding in an unprecedented way, and I believe this is really one of the motors for the acts that we have seen on the street. Immediately after the 7th of October, in the week after, anti-Semitic and terrorist content exploded online, for example, to a 50-fold increase in the absolute volume of anti-Semitic comments on YouTube. The overall proportion of anti-Semitic messages more than doubled during the same period. Given that hate speech online is illegal and terrorist content online needs to be removed by the platforms within 1 hour of notification in Europe, so in the EU, the Commission has taken subsequently legal actions against some of the very large platforms, such as X, TikTok, AliExpress, and Meta. And as you all know, France is now holding the head of Telegram accountable before a court. For many years, in particular since the turn of the millennium, Europe has seen a rise of anti-Semitic hate crime, hate speech, and disinformation. So this has been going on for some time. Extremists can agree on very little, but Jew hatred and anti-Semitic conspiracy is certainly among the commonalities. Already 5 years ago, more than one out of two Europeans said that the conflict in the Middle East influences the way they see the Jewish people in their country. This number has probably changed and gone up significantly since 7th of October. The European Commission adopted in 2021 its first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life, and for us it was very important to have the two to go together, the fighting on the one side and the fostering of Jewish life on this continent on the other side. And what is more true than ever in this strategy is to say that contemporary anti-Semitism, and I quote, can be found in radical and fringe groups espousing right-wing, left-wing, or Islamist extremism. It can hide behind anti-Zionism, but it can also be found in the center of society, not only for Jewish communities, but for democracy itself. Sorry, there's something missing. It's a threat not only for Jewish communities, but for democracy itself. It cannot be recalled often enough that in line with the IRA definition that was mentioned, holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of Israel is anti-Semitic. And this is the form of anti-Semitism that we have seen exploding since the 7th of October. The confusion between criticism of Israel that is possible, also according to the IRA definition, and the anti-Semitic idea of Israel not to exist, or Jews being held responsible for what Israel is doing. Words lead to action, as has been said. Online anti-Semitic hate speech has manifested offline in hate crimes. This poses a threat to democracy, but it also poses a threat to our security. The threat is to Jewish communities first, but it is a threat to all of us. And I believe as we see now the situation, for example, with the horrible attacks on the diversity celebrations in Solingen in Germany, we see how quickly these threats, knife attacks, for example, that the Jews have seen for many years, have now been transformed into attacks also to the wider society. While we have witnessed an increase of anti-Semitism followed not only the Israel-Hamas war, but also before, and I think that's important to recognize that all the different incidents that we have had and the challenges that we have seen as a society, starting from the coronavirus and then the Russian propaganda, which has used anti-Semitic tropes. The inflation that followed has stirred anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy myths. We are putting, as part of this strategy, 96 initiative into action. But above all, it was important as part of the strategy to create structures. So while we've seen anti-Semitism rise, unfortunately, on the other side, there has been positive development with regards to the 27 EU member states recognizing anti-Semitism based on the IRA definition, adopting national strategies to combat anti-Semitism, which is trickling down now into regions, into the cities as well, and appointing special envoys to actually address anti-Semitism and to coordinate government action. The IRA definition has become the basis of our work in this battle. It is recognized twice in Council declarations. We have recognized it in one Council conclusion. The European Parliament has adopted it as the definition to go to, and the European Commission has based its work on it since 2017. Yet, I think, and that is important, despite the situation, it is probably the first time in history that Europe as a whole sides with the Jews. It is certainly the first time that almost all countries not only fight anti-Semitism, but pursue a positive agenda of fostering Jewish life. And on a global scale, it is certainly also for the first time that we have global guidelines for combating anti-Semitism signed now by over 40 states. We coordinate our actions between the special envoys. We work very closely together, and I dare say that between the roughly 40 envoys that exist now globally, we have a very good understanding and cooperation on where we are going together, and we are in this fight together. And so it will not come as a surprise that many of the things that I've said have echoed what Deborah has actually said, because our thinking is alike, and we are convinced that we can move things forward if we act together. Thank you very much.
Leon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, let me first of all also thank the U.S. Mission Ambassador Taylor and her team to set this very timely morning up, because addressing anti-Semitism is and raising awareness in such a forum is already a very good and positive step into its solution and tackling. Ladies and gentlemen, the industrial scale genocide of the Jews of Europe at the hands of mostly Germans is engraved in the national consciousness of today's Germany. There are numerous places of remembrance of the Shoah that are visited by thousands every day. The Holocaust is mandatory material for each high school student. There are annual commemoration days marked by government officials, and maybe most importantly, there are countless civil society projects remembering murdered Jews and their lives as part of German society before the Shoah. And despite of all that, there was not a single day in German post-war history without anti-Semitism. Prejudice and hatred against Jews were never gone, not even in Germany, the world champion of remembrance. And this is important for me to state this very clearly before I come to the current situation. In my country, we have known what anti-Semitism was for decades, not only historically, but as part of everyday life. Jews in Germany were discriminated against, were verbally abused and physically attacked even before October 7th. They were attempted and sometimes even successful terror attacks against Jewish targets in Germany. And I'm telling you all this to make clear that October 7th was a watershed moment for Jews in Germany, as in many other countries, and indeed for German society as a whole, but not because we did not have anti-Semitism in this country before. And I can only repeat, of course, what has been said. Also, the numbers are very shocking. From an already high level, anti-Semitic crimes almost doubled in 2023 compared to the previous year to a total of 5,164. I don't want to give too many figures, but this is really very shocking. And more than half of the entire year's offenses were committed in less than 3 months, starting on October 7th. And I would also once again repeat what Katharina von Schnurbein has just said, to put these numbers into perspective. All in all, 17,001 hate crimes were counted in Germany in 2023. This includes all offenses with a racist, anti-LGBTQ, misogynist or comparable motivation, and about 30% of these offenses were anti-Semitic. And I just like to underline, Jews in Germany, if we count generously, amount to about 0.2% of the total population. This means that almost a third of all recorded hate crimes was committed against a tiny fraction of the overall population. And I also would like to repeat what the Jewish community in Germany suffers is echoed what Leon Saltiel also told us, telling us about the Jewish perspective. Until very recently, the overwhelming majority of anti-Semitic crimes and incidents had a right-wing extremist background in Germany, with anti-Semitic narratives at the heart of this ideology. A large part of anti-Semitic crimes committed in Germany still come from right-wing extremists, but however, the number of anti-Semitic of other anti-Semitic backgrounds has sharply increased since October 7th. The categories religious extremism, which includes Islamism, and foreign ideologies, which includes Arab nationalist ideas, have increased manifold. And I would also like to echo what Katharina and Deborah Lipstadt said, that what is even more worrying is the fact that perpetrators with different ideological backgrounds have started to converge and to cooperate when it comes to Israel-related anti-Semitism. This is remarkable, if not even shocking. Neo-Nazis, for instance, who spend much of their time spreading hate against Muslims and what they consider foreigners, suddenly find common ground with Arab nationalists and Islamists when it comes to their opinions of Israel in particular, but also Jews in general. What seems counterintuitive at first glance starts to make sense, though, when one looks into anti-Semitic narratives. A basic and total rejection of democratic norms and values is common in all of these ideologies. Also what is worrying me is that, for instance, left-wing defenders of LGBTQ rights were seen as queers for Palestine next to Islamists at rallies demanding an end to the Jewish state, expressing clearly anti-Semitic narratives on placards and its chants. So we see these alliances, and we have to react of course, as a government, as society. So now, what does the federal government and the state governments do in this dire situation? First and most importantly, of course, protect actually the Jewish communities, guarantee the actual physical security of Jewish life in Germany, and that was a measure immediately taken after October 7th. Of course, we radically increased security provided outside Jewish and Israeli institutions in Germany. In a survey carried out by the Central Council of Jews in Germany, 96% of the directors of the Jewish communities in Germany said that they were satisfied or very satisfied with the work of the police providing protection. And thanks to the now generalized grasp of the issues among the authorities, the police and the judiciary in Germany, it has often been possible to prohibit anti-Semitic demonstrations before they are even held. This is the fruit of the awareness raising we have been carrying out for many years. When dealing with anti-Semitic rallies, an amendment to the law resulting from my initiative in 2020 has also helped. It makes it an offense to burn foreign flags, including the Israeli flag. If the burning of flags of the committing of anti-Semitic offenses can be expected, then the authorities in Germany can prohibit demonstrations accordingly. In Germany, freedom of expression can be limited if these expressions are likely to incite violence. We make use of this possibility to protect Jews from being harmed. And I'm currently working on an additional measure. Calling for the destruction of another country should also be punishable by law, as this kind of hate mongering has direct consequences for people living in Germany. If supposedly pro-Palestinian demonstrations have nonetheless ended up in anti-Semitic chants or violence against bystanders or police officers, then in most cases the police have reacted immediately by initiating criminal proceedings. The German government issued a ban on activities of Hamas and Samidun. Similarly, the Islamic Center of Hamburg, a hotbed of anti-Semitic agitation, was banned on only several weeks ago in July. And we also need to work on education as a measure to fight anti-Semitism. My proposal to change judicial training has been taken up and implemented in the German Judiciary Act. The aim of this is to raise awareness among future judges of the wrongs committed by the National Socialist regime and to better equip them to recognize anti-Semitism. Classes on this are now mandatory to be able to pass the bar, and the IRA working definition plays an important role of it. And I think it is important also to stress that we have to create structures in the fight against anti-Semitism. This is one key idea of our national strategies. In Germany, I'm calling now for the establishment for anti-Semitism commissioners at German universities. We have introduced anti-Semitism commissioners at every prosecuting office in Germany. We also have increased funding for scientific as well as civil society projects against anti-Semitism and for the promotion of Jewish culture in public life. And this is what I also want to stress. I think the more self-evident Jewish life is perceived in our societies, the less it is endangered to be attacked. So I'm very happy that many German cities and local governments have created centers for the promotion of Jewish lives. And I'm also very glad that a large number of federal states have cooperation agreements with Yad Vashem in Israel and education teachers regarding the Holocaust. These are bits and pieces. Of course, the most important thing is that we make it clear to our societies that it is in their own interest to fight anti-Semitism whenever it occurs, and that in the end, of course, we are fighting not only for the protection of others, which would be enough, of course, but for our own societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leon Saltiel from the WJC, dear Ambassador Michelle Taylor, my fellow colleagues, ambassadors, and special envoys, dear members of the panel, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Organization of American States, I am honored to take part in this panel, where I intend to bring you some information about the status of anti-Semitism in the Western Hemisphere in order to cooperate and building bridges against this old kind of hatred. The timing of this panel could not be more appropriate. Just 3 days ago, we remember the 85th anniversary of Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland that started the Second World War on September 1st, 1939. And that started the most violent and cruel massacre of a single group in world history. If mankind could take just one lesson from the Holocaust, it should be that anti-Semitism is almost always the vanguard of a general attack on all people's human rights. Although Jews are the first victims, the real targets are the entirety of society, democracy, and human rights as universal values. We've been watching nowadays an impressive upsurge of anti-Semitism in the Western Hemisphere. It had been fostered for decades by right-wing and neo-Nazi groups, but since the October 7 massacre of over 1,200 people in southern Israel committed by Hamas and other terrorist groups, we have witnessed a new tide, or a tsunami. It comes now from the extreme left, based on two pillars. The first, a forced identification of Jewish communities in the diaspora with Israeli government policies. The second, an identification of Jews as a rich, white, and privileged people fostered by extremist identitarian groups in North and Latin America. As said by Austrian philosopher August Bebel, anti-Semitism is the socialism of the fools. A new anti-Semitism form, disguised as anti-Zionism, or as some of us prefer to call anti-Semitism related to the State of Israel, has been occupying universities throughout North America, stimulated by radicalized faculties, with academic authorities not showing adequate ability to combat it. Slogans like Jews, go back to Poland, globalize the Intifada, and we don't want no Zionists here, that have nothing to do with peace or peaceful solutions, have been shouted at protests and printed in university newspapers, while Jewish students have been harassed and ostracized in many campuses, especially in the USA and in Canada. This meeting today is especially salient, I have to say, given the UN bodies and rapporteurs' slow condemnation of those racist actions compared to its hasty condemnation of alleged Israeli actions, even if they are unconfirmed. In Latin America, meanwhile, political leaders have been shouting and posting slogans like "From the river to the sea," "Palestine will be free," sometimes even exhibiting Hamas's flags, which calls for the expulsion or murder of over 8 million of Israeli Jews, and wrongfully comparing Israelis' policies to Nazi ones, while justifying attacks by Hamas. Such rhetoric puts the safety and stability of Jewish communities in the region at risk by legitimizing anti-Semitic attacks against them. This anti-Semitism related to the State of Israel posts that, as a supposedly privileged people, Jews are not entitled to the same degree of protection for human rights afforded to other groups. Everybody are equal, but some are more equal than others, as George Orwell wrote in his classic book, Animal Farm. This line of thinking ignores the reality that Jews are not a homogeneous group. There are white, brown, and black Jews, conservative and progressive, rich and poor Jews. And the answer to this growing anti-Semitism in the Western Hemisphere is printed in the very invitation for this panel. Through dialogue, we seek to strengthen global efforts to identify and counter modern forms of anti-Semitism and build a more inclusive and respectful world. Enlightenment, democracy, education against intolerance and Holocaust distortion, as well as law enforcement where legislation is available, these are the instruments of our work. And I believe we can be proud of some achievements even in these difficult moments that we live. Up to now, more than 40 national states have adopted the IHRA definition, 7 in the Americas, which gives a concrete basis for action against anti-Semites. And over 42 countries have reiterated their commitment by endorsing the global guidelines for combating anti-Semitism approved in Buenos Aires last July. Through dialogue and engagement, we are able, me and my friends here in this table, to persuade Meta to include the use of the words Zionists or Zio in its content moderation rules when it means anti-Semitism and attacks against Jews, which help us to combat and punish it when disguised as anti-Zionism. We need to expand this to other social media platforms in order to defeat fake news and racism in the digital world. My friends, these are just a few steps in the long road paved by dialogue, building bridges with other groups and governments, demonstrating how anti-Semitism poisons democracy and civil societies, and showing that Jews and Jewish communities are natural partners in building a more respectful world that may throw anti-Semitism and other forms of hate to the dustbin of history. Thank you very much.